Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Thomas Altenburger, game director at Flying Oak Games, makers of Scourge Bringer and Neuro Voider. How are you doing, Thomas?
I'm doing pretty well, and you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for asking. And, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Thomas, for those that might not know who you are, would you mind maybe telling, me and my listeners and whoever else a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, I am game director at Flying Oak Games, and we are a small company based in France. We are mostly making 2D action pixel art indie game. And when it comes to me specifically, I am a man of many hats because I'm doing a lot of stuff within our structure, and I have a background that is a bit more technical, but nowadays I'm like mostly directing projects. And if I should define me more, I'm more like a game feel kind of person. So I'm the person who put screen shakes everywhere and so on, mostly.
And I did see you made a tweet about that if your game shook too much, that it was your fault, and I don't believe you said you're sorry. I believe it was more of a just deal with it kind of statement. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's more like a kind of a philosophy of game design. It's more like um, we are not the kind of company who is trying to make complex systems and so on, or making very fine-tuned mechanics. We are more people who make very good action games, or at least trying to. And game feel and the example of screen shake is just one of many, because it is one kind of stuff that you can use to add game feel to something. And so it's kind of a game design trope to add screen shake to something.
And yeah, that you're right. It is kind of a trope, but at the same time, on the topic of game feel, I think when done properly, it can really heighten it up. It adds the impact to like what you're doing. And I don't remember where it was. It might have been an GDC conversation or presentation or whatever they are, or somewhere else. It's been many years since I saw this, but one of their like core tenets for how to add personality within the context or constraints of game feel was to have screen shake, and have that screen shake being, obviously varied depending on the task that you are making.
Mhm.
If you have a short jump, a very minimal, very minor kind of, rumble. But if you fall from, a few stories up, give that screen a good shake, because at that point, like you are, as you are being immersed in it, even though it's not like an immersive game, so to say, but as you're being like immersed in it, the screen's reacting, or the game's reacting in the way that you would expect it to, instead of it just being a flat non-shaking thing when someone falls from a few stories up, or punches through a wall, or fires a big honking gun or what have you, right?
Yeah, sure. And I believe I know exactly the maybe conferences that you're mentioning. At least in game feel and in kind of screen shakes, there are two that are pretty famous, at least within the game design sphere. There is the one from Jan Willem Nijman, one of the game designer on games like Nuclear Thrones, Ridiculous Fishing, Luftrausers, and so on. He made a conference that was called, I believe that was The Art of Screen Shake, and it was basically like taking example by coding directly during his talk about like adding screen shake, what you can do with screen shake, what it adds to game feel, and what actually game feel is. And game feel is pretty important to every aspect of game design, because you can basically make any kind of game satisfying. And it's not just about making game mechanics. Game mechanics are just like the systems that are going to come together, but game feel is something that come on top of this, that is more related to polishing something, and it can add so much. And you can really turn a bad game into a good feeling game just like by working on game feeling. And this is something that I really like doing a lot, like taking very, very simple ideas and making them satisfying. This is my kind of stuff.
You know, I think you're right because I do remember when you mentioned Nuclear Throne and such. That does sound familiar, um, in terms of the one I saw because I believe I've seen one from them. However, I liked what you said there that it's game feel is more like polishing, and I think that's a really apt way to put it because like you said, it's not really a mechanic, but it's something that's going to like bind the mechanics you have together or what have you. I'm probably using the wrong way to explain that or put that.
Mhm.
But no, I really like the way you put that about how it's like polishing as opposed to other things like adding mechanics or what have you.
Yeah, and it's really bound to the cognitive aspect of what playing is, and it's more like creating like cognitive feedbacks and what we call in game design feedback loops, in a way that an action should have like a reaction that makes you feel good in a way, and making something visually standing out or responding to your action in a proportional way of this action is a very, very basic and visceral kind of getting a reward for something. So and game feel is all about this. And when I mentioned like Jan Willem and the guys who were involved into Vlambeer, their studio, uh, we really come down from that school of game design, and we really like to feel to we always kind of feel ourselves as like descendants of the Vlambeer school because they kind of uh, they put game feel to a specific level into like indie games, and it's mostly action game, and we really like this kind of stuff. And yeah, mostly we are like, I would say that we are like carrying over the spirit of what Vlambeer was, and so it's basically who we are.
Well, thank you for putting it that way because I understand what you're saying there, and it's always nice to and I imagine they would feel the same way, but it's always nice to have like a spiritual, I don't want to say successor, but um I think the better way to put it is maybe it's always nice to be recognized as like the forefather of a of like a mindset or of a paradigm or what have you. I imagine you know what I'm trying to say. I'm just really sucking at the words. I'm sorry. So Thomas, just to move on from that. So thank you for walking us through that and the brief um, intro to game feel. I guess we might get back to that later. However, though, I want to kind of take it a little back further and hopefully have you explain to me how you got into developing and making games, like what it was that got you into it or why you started or what have you.
I guess it's a combination of many things that happened in my life. Um, it kind of began with everything that was modding in the modding scene. I am 37 years old, and when I got into computers, it was mostly like in the very, very early 2000. And at that time, there were games like Half-Life, Counter-Strike, StarCraft 1, maybe also Unreal Tournament. And this game had something specific, which is that they all came with modding tools. They each shipped with like editors, fully fledged editors that you can like doing incredible mods. And it really was an era during which I didn't have internet, and I kind of discovered all this world with like magazines where you bought magazines. There was like CDs with them, and they were packed with mods, and there was like very, very incredible mods, and like the ones for Unreal Tournament or like solo adventures for Half-Life, like some of them which are very famous, like the series of the Hunger games, and I started looking at those tools because I was very curious about how those mods were made. And at first, um, making games was something very mystical to me. I always believed when I was a kid that it was something very, very complex and unreachable for my whole life, that I would never like kind of attain this kind of stuff. And when I start looking into mods, when I start looking into the editors of the games and getting into it, and more specifically, like games like Unreal Tournament shipped with a DVD of videos of tutorial of how to use the Unreal Engine and how to use like Maya, which was a software, a 3D software to make 3D modeling. And I start getting into this, and I started to like being completely absorbed by making mods, by trying to use game editor, started to look into how games were made, and it started to feel accessible to me. And this is what got me into going into computer science studies. And at some point during my computer science studies, I like drifted away and I started to like doing something completely different from game programming or for game design. And I worked for several years in computer research, and more specifically in cognitive science, and which is something that still is useful to me because cognitive science is at the center of everything that is game design. And at some point, I rage quit this life because for many reasons I rage quit this kind of stuff. And I've told myself, what do I want to do? And most obviously, it was making game. And I came back to making game, and that's pretty much how I started making stuff.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's always, I've heard it a lot, and not to say that I'm diminishing or meaning to diminish or discredit what you said, but I've heard a lot how people kind of started in modding, and then went to school for it, and what have you. So it's really interesting to hear that that's how you got started. Started with modding and playing around with that and like self-teaching yourself. I didn't know that Unreal came with that whole DVD setup thing to walk you through it. So that's really interesting to me because I just think that's such a wild thing that they provided you, or they provided not you, they provide everyone with like the foundation of what they had to do if they wanted to start pushing buttons to make things happen, right? Which is, I think, really cool and a really great way to harbor or foster creativity and interest, and to get more people on board with that. So I think that's really cool that obviously that worked for you. Um, and then obviously going into computer science and such, and finding your way back to what you want to do and making games. So based on how you came into all of this, is there advice you might be able to give those looking to get into the industry based on your actual experiences?
The one and only advice I would have is to simply try to participate in game jams, because it's really something. It covers it all. I mean, it allows you to start making games in a specific framework, because when we sometimes tell ourselves, like, I'm going to try to learn by myself something, and we usually like procrastinate a lot, or for many other reasons, we don't find the time to do this. And registering to a game jam is a good opportunity to kind of uh, not being forced, because it's not in the right word, but it's kind of an opportunity to reserve this kind of time and to get engaged into something. And it's also very cool in a way that it's not a competition. It's usually just for the creativity of it, or just for the learning of it, because many people who get into game jam is just basically to try to learn something. And I see often I often see people who don't have any background in games or actually don't have any skill about any aspect of video game and just get there out of sheer curiosity and just like, hey, I'd like to make myself useful. Can I do something or maybe learn something? And it's typically a good occasion for that. And it's also a very, very good occasion to meet people, because when you start making projects and sometime you tell yourself, I'm going to go online on a Discord server or any kind of community and like post a message like, hey, I'm trying to do a game. Does anybody want to gang together and like make a game with me? It usually don't quite work that way, because complete strangers trying to synchronize it like works for a few and and sometimes it just fall flat, because life, because difference in affinities, different in scope of projects, and or like many other factors. And usually when you meet someone for real, you start to bind with someone, and at some point maybe something will emerge out of this. Maybe not now, maybe in 6 months, maybe 6 years, you don't know, but it's usually like the best way to start getting to make something. And actually I kind of started also through game jams, but it was much more specific, because um, in my part of France, it's kind of a no man land when it comes to the game industry. Like when I started to make game jams, it was actually because I wanted to meet people and trying to make something. And because there were no community in my part of France. And if I wanted to work in video game, I had to like move into either Paris, the capital, or maybe another big city, because it's very centralized. And I told myself that I would like to try to do something locally, like trying to in kind of a cookie way. Like I would like to put together an industry, a local industry out of nothing. And this was in 2012, so 10 years ago. And I started organizing game jams, and suddenly there were people who were like me and willing to do something. And this is how I met my associate, Florian. And this is how we started making game. We haven't been making projects together during game jams, but we were meeting together one game jam after another. And at some point, we became friends, and we told ourselves, well, you are not doing something presently. I am currently finishing my studies, so I'm going to be free in like a couple of weeks. Would you like us to try making something? And I was like, yeah, let's do this. And this is how we start making our first game, Neuro Voider. And things spiraled, and we ended up with a company, and now we've been like running together for 8 years and still going strong. Yeah. And it was just something that was very, very smooth. And making game jams is a very good opportunity to like encourage this kind of things to emerge, and not trying to force something. Letting things emerge by themselves. It may take time, it may take years, but it's usually the best way to keep making something. And making game jam is also a very good opportunity to have something like on your resume. Like even jam projects are very, very useful to like evaluate your resume, and it opens many doors. and it's usually something you can even do even if you are doing like a game design school or something, or maybe even if you don't making a school. It's usually preferable that you have like made game jams along the way, because it really make a very big difference into how things are going to get opened to you.
And, thank you for sharing that because I've heard that before as well, and I think it's just great to hear that more supportive game jams because I I fundamentally I believe in what you're saying. I like the idea of game jams is what I should have said, because it's people that may that have varying levels of experience, and all and whatnot. But at the same time, it's also going to be people that are probably more willing to just experiment a little more. And I think that's kind of like the same reason I really enjoy indie games and indie titles, is because those studios are uh, typically not like as beholden to like AAA or AA or what have you funding, that they're more willing to take chances and see what happens. And I like the idea of game jams because the same thing. It's kind of like the same spirit in my opinion, where you know it's many of the game jams will give like a set of specs for you have to use a minimal color palette, 16-bit, what have you, what have you, what have you. But you get to see everyone's creativity and you get to see what they're doing and experimenting with. And as you also said, it's a very good way to have projects on your resume or on your portfolio or what have you, because um, as I've also heard numerous times, that just getting stuff done is very important to show that you can do it. And you know if combining those two things works, and I think it probably works for a lot of people. I think that's just fantastic advice. So thank you. So Thomas, as well with that, I want to take it back. You did touch on, not really getting a computer until the early 2000s, I believe you said. Was that your first introduction to gaming, or were you playing games and such prior to that as well?
I've I guess I've played for all my life, and my my earliest memories of playing was like in maybe the very early 90s, or maybe late 80s, and it was on the NES. And my first gaming console was the NES with the game TMNT. So the infamous one, if you know about it, the one with the terrible water level, and it was my first contact with video game, and it was something absolutely, well, marvelous.
Terrifying.
No, no, no. It was very, very great, and even if it was like very badly designed and difficult, it was like something. Wow, it was awesome, and but this was like maybe the first gaming console I owned. But I guess my very first contact was maybe not this one. It was maybe a few years back, and it was with the computer of a family member, and it was likely an Amstrad computer, and and I I've got it by games like Ikai Warriors, or very early Amstrad games. And what was really amazed what really amazed me is that you kind of have to like write code to play, because you had to it was like those games, like you have to put a diskette into the computer, and write a command like run game or run stuff, and it started the game, and sometimes you had like a bit more complex command to enter to in order to play the game. And you could also edit script, like it was a basic script in the basic language. And uh and this was kind of my first contact, and it was also pretty amazing, because I was always like very amazed by everything that was computer. But yeah, my real first gaming console, and something that really got me into gaming, was like having an NES, and this was door to many possibilities.
And as someone else who started on the NES, I or let me phrase that, someone, because I'm a little younger than you, um, but someone that had their start for what kind of propelled them being the NES, I definitely understand, how that would have worked. And um, as a TMNT fan, I'm understand everything you're saying about the water level, and I'm sure many other people do. That was actually one of the first games I broke my piggy bank to go and purchase with like birthday money or something. I don't remember. It's been many years. Um, and I can say with much confidence that I how do I say this? I was a very disappointed child because of how
Oh
difficult that
no.
game was. I think I would have really preferred the arcade game, so TMNT 2.
Okay,
However,
yeah.
However, Thomas, um, I am curious. What was your favorite game as a child from that era?
Um, one game that really marked me very profoundly has been Super Metroid. So it was a few years later, and when there was a Super NES, and Super Metroid was like maybe the first game that was not an arcade game. It was well, like one of the first game I've played that was like a full-fledged adventure with save slots, and like you started playing for 1 or a couple hours, and you came back a few days later to continue your adventure, to continue exploring. And this was something that really marked me, and it still is a game that I I'm really fond of, and I play it like once per year. I do a run. I still remember everything of it, and um, and I do believe that it's a game that is very good to explain what level design is, and what makes a good level design and a memorable level design. It's still a very good game in terms of game design, of level design. It aged quite a lot in terms of controls and so on. So it's not maybe like the smoothest Metroidvania to start to begin with, but very moody also. It was a very different tone from other games, which were very cheerful and so on. Super Metroid was dark, and you were alone, and this mood was like very oppressing, and it was very new. And yeah, it's a game that like had a very huge impact of which kind of gamer I am today.
And I definitely understand what you're saying there as well. And like, just rolling back a little on the topic of game feel, the moment you mentioned Metroid. It For me, Metroid has always been, or Super Metroid at least, was always a game that really nailed the whole game feel, like the whole package as a whole in terms of like the audio, or the music, the normal sound. So yeah, the audio, sorry, like the backgrounds, the environments being unique and well done, and the feeling of isolation and everything. Um, but like that game to me is a kind of like a masterclass in game feel because it did everything so right and it was so well polished. Um, so yeah, so I just wanted to make note of that, and also, um, talking about, or you mentioning how like you played it when you were younger and you'd go back a few days later and such. Um, as someone that also beat it, when the first time I beat it, it took me like several days and whatnot. Uh, Only to now learn in the last few years that the world record run on this game is like 12 minutes, or that's wildly wrong. I'm picking a random number, but like it's such a short run now. um I like watching people do it or playing it now when I know how to do everything. To me it feels so wild to know that when I was younger that it took me so long to play it. Like, I'm wondering if like you have a same, um if like you look at that the same way, or if I'm alone on that.
Yeah, somehow, and yeah, indeed, speedruns are also very, very impressive, and I do believe that yeah, the Super Metroid speedrun are always quite something, and it's very fun because it kind of became like a staple in the speedrunning community, and yeah, I always like kind of um have this kind of time related thing with game too, and there are some games that I've completely binged, and I remember that the first time I've played like Zelda 64, the Ocarina of Time, I I guess I've binged it in something like 2 settings, and when I've looked at the counter at the end, like how many hours I've spent on it, it was kind of shocking because I've like played in maybe 2 days for 20 hours or something. And this is something that has kind of terrified my parents because I've made such a scene of like having them to try to get this game. And once I've got this game, I've cleared it in 2 days, and they were like absolutely shocked. Like, why? Why did you binge it in 2 days? You like, you like you made such a fuss about like you would be love to play this game, and now you finished it, and you're likely not going to touch it anymore. Well,
And I can, as I've gotten older, I can definitely understand that mindset. But at the same time, like that just says how much you enjoyed it, right? Like I don't think that's so much a statement of, oh, you've binged it, now you're not going to enjoy it
yeah.
anymore. It's a
Mm.
statement of just how much you enjoyed it and how enthralled you were by it, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I still today don't care that I've like binged it in 2 days. It's just like I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really super, super thankful for my parents to having got this game to me. And really, and yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, Thomas, and I imagine you kind of flirted with the next question, so I'm going to be a little more explicit with, and I apologize if you feel it should have been more obvious, but what is it that makes gaming enjoyable to you?
It's really complex, I believe, because I believe that not every game uh, touch me and touch people on the same way. And some game I'm going to like them a lot because they have like an excellent game feel. Some game I'm going to connect with them because they have a way to tell something. They have a narrative design that fully echoes with me. Or maybe some games I'm going to get into them because they tell something that is very unique and that is like profoundly touching me. It really depends. So, and some game I'm going to like them a lot because they just like hit me hard on every aspect of addictiveness. Yeah, and really depends. So there is no game that I would say are universally attractive. It's more like it really depends on what kind of experience you're trying to tell and you're trying to make people feel. And this is basically what makes a good game. It's what you are trying to achieve, how you are going to achieve it, and trying to achieve it like in the best way possible for every dots to connect and every satisfaction points to trigger into people.
And with all of that in mind, then you mentioned Metroid, you mentioned Ocarina of Time, so I imagine those two are up there. But are there, is there a game in particular that maybe it is one of them or maybe it's not, that you feel really nails those points for you?
There is a lot of games, like maybe what I can say. There is games that are going to hit me very well on the very addictive side of things, like the Diablo series is a series of games that I've played really a lot because I just like to like min-max stuff, like optimizing things. So it's something very satisfying for the brain to like optimize stuff. So this is a game that I really like for this aspect. There are games that I like more for the game feel, and yeah, for instance, games like Nuclear Throne. Throne is a game that I've often liked to do a run at some point, just because I really like the game feel, and I think it nails it very well. Other games, also like Dead Cells, nail game feel very well. And there are also games that are hitting me in unexpected ways, and like Outer Wilds is a game that is absolutely not about game feel, that is absolutely not about optimization, and it's a game I've literally cried by the end, and it's a game that's really touched me very profoundly because it adds such a sense of exploration, and and his story told something that was very profoundly connected in some way to my spirituality, if I should say like this, and uh, and it was very powerful. And so it really depends. So like I believe that every gamer has like multiple sensitivity, and that each game should not aspire to touch all of them, but trying to touch one of them in a very hard way.
So thank you, and I understand what you're saying. That makes perfect sense because it's been mentioned before. Games having pillars. What one of the foundational pillars for what your game is going to be based on, and trying to do trying to have at least one of those things as a pillar, one of those things to be a focus point, and doing it well, I think is really important because you can have games that are kind of jack of all trades, so to say, where it does everything, but it's rarely is it going to be able to do all of those things really well. And that's not to say the people working on them aren't talented. That's not to say anything disparaging or negative about the teams or what have you. It's just really hard, as anyone knows. Anyone that does a lot of things or wears a lot of hats knows that it's really hard to wear all of those hats very well. And you often find yourself just sort of, you have one or two hats that fit good, and then you have a lot of other hats that you can just put on when you need to, but they're not nicely fit. They're not perfect. So I understand what you're saying, and I think that is important to keep in mind that you should focus on having a really strong presence or a strong representation in at least one of those fields, right?
Yeah, and I believe there is also some kind of bias in regard to this, because if you ask like any player and maybe tell them what would you do if you had like an infinite amount of budget, and like what is your dream game, what would you make? And I believe that most people have that bias and would say, I would make a game that does everything. That's like the ultimate game. What is the ultimate game? And I believe that this kind of aspect of ultimate game, like a game that does everything, is a perfect fantasy that allows you to make anything, is is really running after rainbows. And because if something allows you to do anything, it most likely isn't going to make anything relevant or powerful. And I believe what is magic about making games, or what making any kind of entertainment, or like movies or even music or even kind of form of art. And I believe that what's powerful is that you can take one idea and making it flourish in a way that is going to be more powerful that if you made something that does everything. And even things like as simple as Mario games, like the one pillar that is just jumping. And now if you look like at what we have, like Mario games, like even Mario Odyssey, which is a game that is basically just about jumping and running around, and it's just a wonderful game with wonderful game design and level design. It's just like super awesome, and it's not a game that allows you to do everything, but it's just I believe it's a bias, and trying to make something and making really, really, really stand out and trying to tell something out of it is something that has much, much more power that like living a fantasy of unlimited possibilities, which I don't even know where the fun would be.
Yeah, exactly. And just to make one comment before moving on, as a developer, personally as a developer, sorry, not to phrase the question as for you as a developer. However, I know this will resonate with you. But what you said about with unlimited budget and such, just doing a game that has everything, to me that sounds like terrifying scope creep. So I think I think that says a lot. I imagine I'm not alone in that mindset, in that unlimited budget just equals terrifying scope creep.
Yeah, it's absolutely this kind of aspect, and I believe it's the same. It's a kind of the same stuff with the unlimited quest for like photorealistic stuff, and it's the same time of seeing like it's really a player's dream to see something like running with reality graphics, but I do believe that um, graphics in a very realistic way is not for making game, because making game involves a lot of stuff that you don't even see or notice as a player, like even a level design of like placing object of specific colors in your site, just so that you are naturally attracted to it, to create a natural path, even if your game is an open world. This is something very, very clever, and something that usually use a lot the art direction and how you create contrast with stuff and so on. And running after the perfectly replicated reality is something that is likely not going to work, because it breaks level design. It breaks the opportunity to make level design and game design, and you are likely just going to reproduce reality, and reality is boring. Well,
Yeah, yes, I understand what you're saying, and if you're, yeah, if all you're doing is, I shouldn't say it this way, but if it's highly realistic, it's not only it's going to be harder for the developers, harder for systems and all of that, but at the same time, sometimes you want to escape reality, right? And doing hyper realistic things where yes, they're going to look nice and such and what have you, but at some point as well, sometimes you want to escape reality, and maybe that hyper realistic stuff is just going to be a little overwhelming if you're not in the mood for it, if that makes any sense.
yeah, but yeah, right. But I also do believe that this is also my kind of how I see things, and it's not like it's mine, and it's maybe kind of limited, because I believe that the other aspect of the coin might exist. And I'm always like wondering about this when you see games like um, Truck Simulator or Farming Simulator, because they are actually a lot of farmer who are actually playing Farming Simulator, and like it's kind of like you are working after work, and but they are enjoying this in a way that it's a game. And this is something that kind of fascinates me, and maybe an aspect that I am missing to this.
And thank you for elaborating, 'cause clearly I think I missed what you were saying, but thank you for correcting and elaborating on that. Yeah, I'm not equipped to really think on that, but that is an interesting point. And yeah, I think, if I just think that's an interesting point and worth I imagine it's worth investigating to someone far more equipped than I. So, Thomas, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to let you get, you know, on with your evening, on with relaxing and what have you. However, I do have a few more questions unrelated to games, if you are okay with that.
Yeah, sure, go on.
Awesome. So I'm gonna start this with this one, and I apologize. I know I told you before we started recording that I wasn't gonna throw any hardballs at you or what have you. But I'm sorry, I can't resist doing this. On Twitter currently, with your name, you have a pizza and a pineapple. I really want to hear your opinion on pineapple pizza.
I do believe that every pizza are beautiful, and that's basically my take.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for that. I know I apologize. I said I wasn't gonna throw a hardball at you, but
No, don't worry.
Um, but yeah, no, that wasn't meant to be throwing shade or anything. I I live in Canada. That's where the Hawaiian pizza was actually made. I have no
Oh,
idea how or why it came from Canada, but it did. Um, and I have no problem with it. So, everyone else that does have a problem with it, I think, like you said, all pizzas are beautiful and, maybe we should bask in the beauty of all the different pizzas that exist, right?
yeah, right. And I mean, it's also important to be mindful of each and everyone liking about this, because it's not about like trying to antagonize any kind of liking about pizza, but like most of things, I believe it's just like, yeah, trying to being respectful to people who might like something, might not like something, just trying to understand why and trying to get together in a respectful way.
Thank you, Thomas. That is a beautiful philosophy that I did not think we were going to learn about while discussing pizza.
Yeah.
Now, moving away from this hardball, outside of making games or outside of playing games or what have you, what other kind of hobbies do you have? Like, what other kind of things do you enjoy in your life?
Actually, I do like making pizza. No, but no, yeah, pizza. It's a way to like cope with a frustration of mine that I am not someone who has like any creative skill in a way like I can draw, I can't like play music, I can sing, I can dance, and at some point I've told myself I would like to try making something and make it very well. What can I do and what can I try to perfect? And that was making pizza. And uh, and actually, I've been kind of proven wrong lately, because when I tell this story to other game developers, they told me, "But hey, you've been making games, and you've been trying to make games like to your maximum. And isn't that the same thing? And aren't you already someone who do creative stuff, but you just don't realize because like making game design is not something that is tangible?" And yeah, I believe they were kind of right. But I still enjoy a lot making pizza.
And I'm gonna follow up with this then because I think it's a valid thing, especially with the previous question. What is or what has been your most surprising pizza that you've made that you maybe didn't expect was gonna come out good? But like, what one was it that you were like, yeah, let's see what happens, and were blown away by it, if you don't mind sharing?
Actually, I like pizzas to be very, very simple, like just plain tomato sauce and just like some mozzarella and maybe basil. And this is like my preferred way to enjoy pizza. But on the other way, At least here in France, we have like the way we do pizza in France is you put like everything you have on the fridge in the fridge on your pizza, and it makes like very very thick pizza with like all kind of stuff on it. And I do believe that at some point with friends we ended up making a very enjoyable pizza out of a frozen one. We took a frozen pizza and we like throw at it like any kind of stuff that was like in the fridge, like a whole half of a chicken, like barbecue sauce, fried onions, and other kind of stuff that was there. And it turned out to be kind of good, pretty good, and it was kind of surprising for where it came from. But yeah, serendipity is the best ally to pizza making and also game making.
Yes, I can definitely appreciate, serendipity and things, and I I think that puts a very new twist on the term leftover pizza, if in my mind at least.
Yeah.
Um, and I will throw this out there for you, only because going back to one of the first things said, you might find it interesting. There was there is, it does exist still, I assume, but there is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pizza book that
Oh,
has went through for a good handful of, you know, good handful of different and weird recipes.
they were
Um,
very real. Yeah.
yeah, for some of them, and if you're ever feeling adventurous, you can seek it out if you would like. I've tried some of them; they are interesting. It's a very weird thing, I will say though, to actively be cutting up pickles to think, well, I'm gonna bake these pickles on a pizza. But yeah, just I'll share that with you because you mentioned turtles earlier. You like making pizza. You might feel adventurous one day and really want to go crazy. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the recommendation. And I'm now like kind of being shocked that I haven't been looking into this kind of book yet, given my like past adventures with TNMT and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's more than just a pizza book, by the way. It has a bunch of different stuff, but a good chunk of it, the one that I saw at least, and have is for pizza. Um, Now, Thomas, though, with that in mind, as I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I do want to let you get on with enjoying your evening. However, if there was anything else you did want to discuss, maybe a cool game, or you want to talk more about the projects you're working on, or something you just feel more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. As well, please feel free to let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also be including in the episode description for you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the most convenient way to find me is mostly on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Mr. Helmut. And yeah, if I can add anything to it, I believe that it's mostly about like what we told about the game jams because I, I I I don't know who is your audience, but I do believe that it's mostly going to be people who are interested in game development or maybe trying to get into it. And yeah, trying at some point to participate into game jam. It's really very very enriching experience and usually a very very chill one because it's not a competition and by nature it's something just to chill and to try to even just uh, trying to connect. And I believe it's a very important thing and always enjoyable. So yeah, if you have the opportunity, just go on with game jams. Always cool.
Awesome. And with that in mind, Thomas, because I meant to ask this earlier, and I apologize, but are there any particular game jams that you personally have participated in, or that you enjoy, or that you think are good for people to pay attention to? And I know there's a whole bunch of them, so I apologize if that is way too much of a wide open question. But yeah, is there any like game jams that you personally think people should take a look at, or ones that you enjoyed previously, or what have you?
The ones I enjoy the most is the ones that you see people in real, because this is where the magic happen. Just because people interacting together, it's like a wonderful thing. And I would usually try to recommend the Global Game Jam, which is the biggest and largest game jam, and you have like that site organized like everywhere in the world, and usually cool. And there are all other kind of game jam which I would recommend, but these one are maybe less accessible because maybe not organized very widely. Here in France, we have a game jam which is called the Barbecue Game Jam, and it basically started with the in the context that many people were very impressed by Game Jam. Usually, when you talk about Game Jam to someone, they will say, "Wow, this looks very cool," but it's not for me. Like, I'm not skilled enough, and it seems too daunting. Like, you have to meet people, I don't know anyone, and so on. And so the Barbecue Game Jam kind of tried to take this from the other side, like saying, let's make a game jam during which we don't try to make a game, but like mostly try to enjoy a barbecue and together, and maybe make a game at some point, but just maybe. And I find this very cool because it removes the daunting aspect of making games, and it's just about like trying to socialize first, and maybe something will come out of it.
And thank you very much for those recommendations. And I really like the idea of what you said for like the barbecue game jam, because that, like you said, it's the pressure, the expectation, I guess, to have something, to have a game come out of that isn't so high as much as um just getting to meet people and experience and craft friendship or what have you, right? I think that's just absolutely wonderful. And thank you for the other recommendations to recommend. And you know, yeah, just thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, however, Thomas, if there wasn't anything else that you wanted to add or what have you, I will let you get on with your evening. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Awesome. So thanks again, Thomas, for making the time to have this conversation with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Always a pleasure. I always appreciate, people letting me steal their time. And as well, thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share it with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.